One of the things that I study and I'm very interested in, I'm a professor of business, is the fact that people often look at a a swath of the population, take a sample of the population, or you run into a group of people, or you go to the mall, you go to a classroom, and you look at them and you infer certain things from them, but those inferences are often wildly off. And we often don't self correct on those inferences, or it requires a lot of coaching, a lot of mental work um, to self correct on these inferences. For example, what causes success? What leads to failure outcomes? What is why is there competencies in certain areas? Why are some people more wealthier than others? Any number of these different kind of questions. You can look at a population, or you look at a sample of the population, and it could be a complete random sample, and you put them, and so you, like in a classroom, or it's pretty random in, somewhat random in a classroom, or you go to a town meeting, right? Like you go to any number of, you go to the gym, you go to Walmart, and you look at all the people, and you're gonna infer things based on very surface levels characteristics. Um, and you're gonna infer, and this is what leads to success or not success, right? And it's not necessarily any sort of deep, thoughtful thinking of what is truly going on there, right? So you might pick up on things like manners, for example, a firm handshake, um, looking at, what people wear, right? All of the sort of traditional sort of demographics that you might have thought about. But, um, it may be the style that people talk, or, the stories that they tell you, or, um, you know, if you're looking at on the outside, right? Or sort of if you're looking in the inside, if you're in a classroom, or you go to the gym, you might look at watches and infer um, what success or who's successful and who's not based on watches. Or you go outside and you look to see at what people are driving. That's often the case. What houses they live in, where their property is located, right? Like all of these kind of things that we look at the surface level, but time and time again, what statistics show, what the evidence almost always shows, is that there is a mild correlation often between these kind of things. Um, and why is that correlation? Why does that actually exist? There could be all sorts of different factors. It might be what's called reverse causation. It's kind of tricky thing to think about, but instead of thinking like um, watches, for example, or people are successful that they wear nice watches. It may actually be the opposite. It might be that the fact that you're wearing a nice watch gets people to believe that you're successful, and you get opportunities from it, and you become successful from it. So it's a little tricky with these things. But in general, if you were to look at, what do we know that actually causes success? And it's, really well studied at this moment, or what causes people to do better. Um, when we study it, it's things like get an education, get a good, solid education in something that the environment values, right? So you may get a good education, and I apologize. I know that this can be offensive to some people, but like in a liberal arts degree, it's beautiful. You get a lot of education from that, but the external environment doesn't value it as much as something like you get a dentistry degree, right? And there's all sorts of reasons for that, all sorts of institutional effects and things like that. You get a solid education, which is almost always the biggest predictor. You get experience, right? Some age. And then on top of it, um, deliberate, effective learning, right? Like, so you become a specialist in your domain by working hard. And I'm not saying working hard in the sense of overworking and doing things that often what people infer, like working, 14-hour days and things like that. That's a recipe to burn out, and that's a recipe for a terrible life. But having getting mentorship, for example, um, having a somewhat of some sort of, you know, uh, a listening board that is relatively smart that could, listen to your ailments, but also every once in a while give you pointers. And so, why do I say relatively smart? It doesn't necessarily mean like you go buy a mentor, right? Like, or you go purchase consultant. It means like, have a partner in your life, right? Like I have my wife. She's pretty damn smart. Um, and she's my listening board sometimes. Sometimes she doesn't listen to me. Often she doesn't listen to me, but that's another story. So what I'm getting at is that there's some really effective tried and true things. Um, investing investing in anything for a long time that has on that we all clearly understand that provides value, right? Like clear signals that provides value, and it's often talked about. Um, that education, for example, is the thing that I'm thinking about. It may be um, investing in assets like, um, you know, mutual funds, right? Like we know that this stuff is pretty tried and true at this moment. Um, you would go and anybody in a rudimentary understanding of their area would say these particular things, right? You talk to a high school teacher, they'd almost say these particular things. Now, the truth is that because we make poor inferences, right? So there's three ways that, um, we understand the world, right? We think about the world, we act on the world, and we get outcomes. We sort of observe these outcomes from it, right? So it's, um, how you think controls what you behave, as the sort of cognitive behavioral therapy sort of thinks about. Um, so what I'm getting at here is these sort of tried and true things actually do work, but we make these inferences all of the time based on thinking like, well, you need a fancy car to demonstrate to everybody that you're wealthy. And then because of that, then you're going to get some sort of magical returns from that, right? Or you need to have spectacular competence in a particular area, and you do that, but it's often like some sort of magical competence that we think about, right? Like they're just sheer smart, or they have sheer athleticism. No, it is athleticism, right? It's talent, but with a god awful amount of repetition. Um, and not just repetition in the sense of like this is kind of willy-nilly, but repetition that is very trained, focused, and very deliberate. And these things over time, if you do this for a long time, they pay off enormous dividends. But the problem is we make inferences all the time at a repeated basis that throw us off. And I do that all of the time too. And I always have to coach myself through and say, this is not the story that I should accept, but I have to accept the one where I have to look at the tried and true, that actually does matter. All right. Take care and have a wonderful day.